Hey guys, Jeff Shoemaker, broker owner of Remax Agility here in Aldie, Virginia. I am back today with our fifth video in our home buying process. This step in the process is home inspections. The last step, if you remember, step 4 was how to prepare and submit an offer that's competitive. Now there is one more step between that and home inspections, and that is negotiating. I did not put negotiating in our process as a step because that's something you really need to strategize with your agent you're working with. Every transaction is very, very specific, and if you don't have all the criteria and the scenario and what's going on, all the variables, it's really hard to give a really good opinion on what they should do. So I'm going to leave that to you and your agent. So we are going to talk about home inspections, and home inspections are super important. I'm always surprised when I see transactions where there's not a home inspection or an inspection of really any kind at all. That is really, really super risky, and I would never, as an agent, ever recommend to a buyer to not have a home inspection. I often even have home inspections on my listings before I list them, just because if I know there's going to be some possible issues out there, I really want to know before we put it on the market, so we can either disclose it or we can have it repaired in a time and at a price the seller approves, versus being in a situation where you're finding it out at home inspection, having to negotiate to have those things repaired, and then being short on time and having to pay prices that are way more than you would normally pay if you had time to shop and if you had time to find the best contractor for what you're trying to do. Having said that, who are home inspectors and what do they do? So a home inspector in my state, every state is different. Virginia, you have to be licensed as a home inspector, so you have to have licensing through the state, you have to have insurance, and there is some recourse for a home buyer in the event that there's something that goes wrong that's missed. But most of the time when you sign a home inspection report, it will say that the most you can sue them for is the price of the home inspection. So good luck getting a whole lot out of that unless there's something really egregious they miss. Normally it's not something you can really get much out of. But having said that, always get a home inspection. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people purchase properties that I've either sold as a listing agent, and the buyer, to be really competitive, took out home inspection and found something weeks, months later, and felt like they were shortchanged or someone lied to them or didn't disclose something. Really, in fact, it's something the seller really didn't know and I didn't know. Some things we could never really know, and they're upset, want someone to pay for it. And in that situation, it's not going to be the past seller, because in our state, if the seller truly didn't know and really had no way of knowing, it's really a situation where it's going to be their word against yours, and you're going to spend way more money in legal than what it's going to cost typically to have a home repaired. So it's really not worth it. But always consult an attorney for their opinion as well. Having said that, the home inspector's licensed. Once you're contracted on a property, and if you have so inclined to do so, negotiated a home inspection, and you have a certain amount of days in your contract to have this home inspection completed, I will tell you that you need to expect to spend 3 or 4 hours or more during the inspection. It's not 100% necessary as a buyer for you to be there for the entire inspection. I typically like to have the inspector come in, do most of the inspection, and my client come in maybe the last 30 or 40 minutes. Home inspections take way longer if the buyer is there through the process, because there's lots of questions that can wait to the end, and if you keep interrupting the inspector and what he's trying to do, one of two things can happen. One, it's going to take a lot longer to get it done. Secondly, the other thing that's really going to happen is that you're going to be in a position, sorry, people keep texting me, you're going to be in a position where you're going to end up missing something, because the home inspector is going to be focused on you, answering your questions, or cutting up, talking about the awesome game last night or whatever, and they're not going to pay attention to what they're doing. Next is they're going to inspect in the timeline that you have negotiated in your contract, and that timeline is going to be something that both parties have agreed to, the amount of days they have to inspect, the amount of days they have to negotiate. And in our state, typically, well, in our association rather, for Northern Virginia, we do have verbiage in our home inspection contract that gives the buyer some time, even after they've negotiated with the seller, to just back out of a contract under buyer selection. So it's really there to protect buyers. Buyers really don't know what they're dealing with until they have the inspection, so it's only right they have enough time to decide whether or not this is going to work out for them or not, or if they want to make the cost to to have a property repaired. If a first-time home buyer has very limited resources and they go look at a property and they close on it and then later have to put a roof or foundation repairs or anything that's really costly, it could really keep them from being able to make mortgage payments. If the house becomes unlivable, well, they end up going to foreclosure. So it's really better to keep that from happening and have the buyer have that inspection and negotiate, make sure they can afford those things. I can't promise they're going to catch everything. They're going to catch a lot of things. Home inspectors are going to look at plumbing systems, roofing system, HVAC, electrical from the outlets, fixtures, and switches. Now, they can't see inside walls. Home inspectors are not going to cut sheetrock and look at wiring behind cabinetry and any of those things. I've actually seen times people have gotten sideways and filed complaints against parties or lawsuits because a house had new cabinets and a new kitchen put in, and then they take things apart for some reason because they want to change things and find out that all the wiring is substandard, it wasn't put in right, an electrician didn't do the work, and those are things that can get a little bit dicey. But for the most part, they're going to look at all the things that are on the surface. They can test most of all the things that they can see. It has to be things they can visually inspect. I'll also say that a really great home inspector is not going to try to justify his home inspection cost by finding things to repair. That can be a little bit dicey and be an issue as well. I've had times where home inspectors are quoting building code, which they really shouldn't because they're not a contractor or they don't work for building code enforcement, and to have them tell you what's code and what's not is really not proper. You get into situations where they'll start pointing out things that are relevant. They're not required by code. They're not required by safety. They're not required by really anything. It's just things that people prefer, like having cover over egresses or egress windows for basements to keep water out of the windows. I mean, that's something that, would be nice to have, but it's not something that's required. If the window seals properly, it's not like it's going to leak. The home inspector is going to spend quite a bit of time at your property. Now, there are some pretty big differences in pricing for home inspectors. I have been using the same home inspector for probably 13 years, probably going on a little bit longer than that maybe. I've known him for a long, long time. He's great. I won't tell you in a video who he is because I would still like to be able to use him in the future, but I will. If you PM me and you need a great home inspector, I will refer him or refer you to him. But what I will say is that he hasn't changed his price ever since I've known him. And if he has, it's been almost minimally to nothing. He charges about half what most home inspectors charge. There's nothing wrong with anybody's business model, and I'd never say anybody's wrong for charging a price, but I do see some that are really exorbitant. They're way too high. I just have a hard time seeing how they can justify the amount on a property. If a home inspector asks you when you're calling them to schedule, if they ask you how much the house is, I wouldn't hire them. I know a lot of home inspectors are going to comment on this and be really upset with me because that's probably how they do it. Home inspections really shouldn't be driven by the cost of the house, because if the house is, let's say a house is in Arlington and it's 4,000 square feet, but it's in an area where the house is $3 or $4 million, versus being, say, in a rural area where a 12,000 square foot house is $3 or $4 million. I have a hard time believing that a home inspector is going to do more work on a property just because it's more expensive. And I think it's a little bit silly for them to charge more money. But having said that, everybody has a right to their business model and be competitive in the market. I do cringe sometimes when somebody sends me a home inspection report and it's 80, 90, 100 pages. And in my past listings that I've worked on, I'm really looking for a punch list. And when you send a home inspection addendum in my association, typically what we want to see is the report. We want to see the specific defects in system or components or things that are damaged that we couldn't see when we looked at the property prior. They're not going to be able to ask for obvious things like, there's a stain on the carpet, I want new carpet. They could have seen that when they looked at the property before they wrote a contract. That's not really something I would be very happy about negotiating. Most of the time on my listings, I'll have a conversation with the listing agent or the buyer's agent and let them know that unless it's safety related, lender repair related, whether it is a component or system defect, those are about the only things we're going to consider making repairs on. We're not going to make repairs on cosmetics. every market is different based on the market. Like if you're in a really slow market and you have lots of inventory and you have a home inspection and you want to negotiate things that are outside the norm of, say, today's market where things are really crazy and high paced, it really depends on what you're doing at the moment. But right now in this market, I would find it very doubtful that a homeowner seller is going to make cosmetic repairs to a property just because you don't like a paint on a wall or you don't like the type of appliances they have, even though they work. So if something functions properly, you really shouldn't ask for it to be replaced. I do see that sometimes people come in and say, well, the home inspector says the roof's only going to last 20 years and the roof is 16 years old, so I wanted you to pay for a roof. Well, I'm 50-50 on that. If the roof has almost no service life left and we're getting ready to hit winter, the buyer buying the property has limited resources, doesn't really have a lot of money saved up to make those kind of repairs later, I'm going to have them ask for a roof to be replaced, because they're in a position where later, if they're not able to get that done, the roof's probably going to start leaking. It's going to damage the property. Insurance will probably cover the interior damage, hopefully, but it's not going to cover the cost of the roof, because it's something that was there, that was existing. And if they're looking at things inside the house that are system related, like outlets that don't work, well, of course those are system defects, but for the most part everything's negotiated. You're going to have some buyers get really aggressive on an offer, and they're going to offer over everyone else, take out certain contingencies to make their offer more competitive. And in an effort to get back some of that money they're overpaying in the contract, they're going to wait to the home inspection and they're going to start throwing rocks at you, asking for big discounts or asking for a bunch of repairs. If you don't have that conversation ahead of time and you're a buyer and that's the plan, you may get yourself into a situation where that seller just tells you to go kick rocks and there's no way they're going to do those repairs. And all you've done is waste a whole bunch of your time and a bunch of other people's time, and you're not going to close on that house. So keep those things in mind. When I did a lot of REO foreclosure work, it was not uncommon for us to tell buyers, because most of our corporate-owned sellers had addendums that clearly stated they did not make repairs, they would not do anything on a home inspection report, and that the home inspection was for informational purposes only, and anything wrong with the property they had already taken into consideration when they priced it. So even though we would have those long conversations with buyer's agents, we would still have buyer's agents send us an addendum asking for 40 or 50 things, or asking for 10 or 15,000 off. And it's amazing, because we'd go back and say, yeah, well, we told you you couldn't submit that, we weren't going to accept anything like that, and we're going to void the contract. They would act really surprised. And I can't believe that you're not even going to consider it. You're like, well, we told you we weren't going to do that, and we're not going to do that. Now, when you're buying corporate-owned properties, a little bit different. Every asset manager is different. Every property based on days on market is different, and it doesn't mean the answer is the same on every property. But depending upon the asset manager or the company, it may be a standard absolutely no. And you really want to know what you're doing as a buyer before you send over those types of addendums asking for those things to get repaired. The next thing would be is in the home inspection addendum, when you have things that you find that you're going to ask the seller to resolve, to repair, or to credit for, you want to be very explicit in explaining what it is you want. So let me give you some examples. These are things that I've had come out really on me with transactions and process, and I get a few days before closing and you're just taking a beating over them. One of the first ones I would say would be, if a house has TVs mounted on walls, pictures mounted on walls, there's lots of things that have nails and clips and things that are screwed into sheetrock and drywall that are on all the walls. The contract doesn't say normally for our association that the seller has to remove all those things and then repair them and paint to match. Typically, anything bolted into a wall is considered a fixture, part of the property. Now, the electronic appliance that's hung on that is not considered part of the property, so the TV mount would stay, but the TV would go. Well, most people, if they're going to take their TV with them, they probably want the mount. Most buyers buying a property, if they're not going to put a TV in that exact location, they may not want that mount on the wall anyway, but if you remove the mount, you have to repair the holes. But if you just put in your contract, fill holes, then there's nothing that says that they're going to fill it correctly or use sheetrock to patch. They're going to mud, sand, prime, paint to match. And you may find out when you go to your walkthrough that all these holes and stuff on walls are filled with toothpaste or spackle, and they're not proper repairs, and they're not sanded or painted. And the home buyer goes to look at this property in a walkthrough and gets upset because they're like, well, wait a minute, all this was supposed to be repaired, and it ends up not being repaired. So if you are very clear between parties in the agreement, then you don't have misunderstandings normally, and then you don't have people getting angry. You also don't risk having a situation where you end up not closing on a transaction. So primarily when I do those things, it's important to have a very clear understanding of how those things are going to happen. Something else I would recommend, I've had plenty of home inspections where the property has been lived in and the people are still living there currently. Now, of course, they leave for the home inspection, but you end up in a situation where they have lots of rugs, lots of furniture in their house, and as you are doing your inspection, nobody ever lifts a rug, moves any furniture, anything to check the condition of the floor under it. Now, you negotiate your home inspection, you negotiate a few things, but nothing to do with your flooring. And the week before closing, you do your final walkthrough to make sure everything from the house is removed. Sometimes this happens the day of closing, the day before closing, and then you find out that there's giant marks on floors, or that the floor is oxidized from the sun around where the rug was, and there's all these different colors of flooring. The buyer just assumed all the floor was perfect. Well, now the buyer feels like, well, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. I'm going to have to refinish this whole floor, and I'm going to have to pay for it, so I don't want to close. Well, you're going to have a really hard time getting that seller to give you anything for that, because you had a home inspection, you had an opportunity to move things around, move furniture, lift rugs, move art on walls. I've had times where there's been a giant hole in a wall behind a painting because someone knocked a hole in it with a hammer. You go to do the walkthrough and there's this big hole, and you're like, well, wait a minute, this hole wasn't here before. And I say, well, no, but the hole was there during the contract, and when you looked at the property before writing an offer, and the property condition hasn't substantially changed, and we're not repairing it. Well, in that case, as an agent, well, you wind up having to pay for the repair because you're trying to make your buyer happy, but it's really not a fun situation, not something you really always want to do or have to deal with. So be very clear and be very descriptive on what it is you're looking for to resolve whatever the issue or defect is from your home inspection report. Check everything in the house. Make sure you're happy with the condition of it, because you're only going to get really one shot to negotiate a lot of those things. And even though someone isn't necessarily entitled to have any of those things repaired, it doesn't mean they won't ask. And as an agent, we have to be careful, because it doesn't mean our buyer won't back out the day of closing and not close. And you've put in all this time as an agent, the buyer's put in all this time and money into the property, and they will literally back out over something frivolous, especially if the negotiations through the process have been tense. If the people really haven't had a good relationship and they don't feel like each party's acting in goodwill, you can be in a situation where it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. So what I will say to kind of finish up is that have good faith through the process, be clear, indicate what you want, get it in writing, have a clear agreement, make sure everybody does what they're supposed to do, and you'll go to closing, everyone will be happy. Now, can't promise they'll be forever happy, because there's things they may find later that you had nothing to do with, and they didn't know and you didn't know, and people are upset. But in the end, get a home inspection. Make sure it's a home inspector that, one, charges a competitive price. There's no need to pay someone exorbitant amounts of money for a home inspection. There are still great inspectors out there, just like great agents out there, who work for very competitive fees. And two, make sure that you let the home inspector do their job. Three, make sure that before the home inspector leaves, they walk you through any of the defects, issues, or problems, because you're going to have to articulate in your addendum to the seller what it is you say is defective and what it is you want them to do to resolve it, fix it, or credit you for it. The third thing is, also, when you're leaving the property, make sure that you get a copy of the report quickly, because if it's a weekend, it's a Friday, and the home inspector is finishing up on a Friday afternoon, and you've only got a few days for your home inspection, the sooner he can get you the report, the sooner you can negotiate with the seller on that report. don't sleep on it. Get it done and move forward. Having said that, the next step in the process is really going to be about how to clear finance addendums and appraisal addendums and what to do in the event of a short appraisal and all those good things. So stick around for those things, look out for those things, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. And thanks for watching this video. And if you like the video, please hit like. It's important to us. And if you want to see more videos from us, please hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, put them below. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope you're having a good week, and we'll see you soon.